So, Delyanne, I want to welcome you to the show. You are about to give us probably the most important wisdom that a lot of the listeners have been asking for. I just want to thank you for taking the time to come on and share.
Well, thank you. I hope I can live up to that hype, but that's always my goal.
I do not doubt that you will totally live up to the hype. And we will have already said in the intro a little bit about what you do and your background. But if you can kind of explain in your own words your own financial journey and how that has evolved to you now helping so many other people in this moment. Where did it start?
Yeah. So, if we're going to talk about where did Deli and the Money Coach start, that started in 2020, which literally like 3 months before the pandemic. I was in the middle of my own personal finance journey of paying off my student loans. I had decided that, I wanted to become financially independent. I wanted to leave my career as an attorney. I was so incredibly unhappy, burned out, and feeling so frustrated when I discovered this whole world of investing and I started, launching into my goals and what am I going to do and I had this plan that I was going to retire by 45 and I was busy paying off my student loans and I started sharing about it on Instagram. And it's funny because it used to be a fitness page before because I love
Oh.
fitness. Yes, I used to do spinning on the spinning instructor on the side. I've always loved fitness. And I went to my followers and I was like, "Hey guys, I know this is a fitness page, but I'm really into this personal finance stuff now. And if you're not interested, you can leave. But otherwise, this is what we're going to be talking about because it's just so intriguing to me." And people were so into it. They're like, "Oh, yes, like I'm struggling with this too. Like you're going to talk about paying off your loans. Fantastic." So I was, in the process of paying off $150,000 of student loans from law school, mostly from law school, some from undergrad, and started sharing it online. And my sister, who is also a fantastic business coach, I went to her and I was like, "Oh my God, I think I found something that I'm really passionate about and that I really want to share with other people. I think I want to teach people about personal finance and be a money coach." And she's like, "Let's go for it." And so we started building the business and she started, she's a marketing genius. So she's teaching me about marketing and I'm teaching her about investing as I go. I built Slay the stock market and it exploded, right? And that's by March 2021, I put in my notice to quit my job and running the business full time, which now the course has, 7,000 students.
I'm gonna say whoa first because I knew some of this, but I think one, I love that you had it as a fitness page before because the whole point of this podcast is about health,
Yeah.
and some people might think, "Oh, what does wealth and money have to do with health?" But you really were pivoting, and these people were interested in it because they understood that in order for you to have well-being, you have to be financially secure. Like, how can you take care of yourself with that stress? How can you care for others if you're not able to
Yes.
provide? Like, it's so much that I think it's amazing that you pivoted into that and you shared your own journey going through it. I love that you worked with your sister on it as well. Like, this whole thing of collaborating with women is what we love here.
Yeah, my sister has
And
been so inspiring in this journey and she's been so supportive since day one. So it's lovely though. She'll call me sometimes and be like, "Oh my God, I have this crazy investment portfolio because of you."
no, I love, 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 love that. I think that's a huge thing too, is like people could look at what you've done and think, oh, she did it completely alone. And to your credit, a lot of it you did, but you had someone also to
Hmm.
help you guide you with some of the stuff and you helped her as well. Can I ask you, because this is kind of the most important
Hmm.
thing that really you specialize in is why do you think since you're helping people invest and you're helping
Hmm.
people feel comfortable working with different knowledge in the stock market, what do you think stops people from doing it? What are the blocks? Why do we feel scared? Why does it feel inaccessible?
Yeah, I think it's the thing that I've heard the most is it just feels overwhelming. The language is not friendly. And what I try to tell people is that it was intentionally built that way, right? This is a system that was built to intimidate people, to gatekeep information, to create basically a whole industry so that people feel like, "Oh, you have to hire, a specialist or somebody who understands this stuff so that you can actually take advantage of it." And for a long time, that was the case. You really did have to pay somebody a lot of money. And so for many years, people have felt disconnected from this industry because it's like, I don't have a lot of money. Sometimes you had to have a certain minimum net worth to even work with these people, you know? Today, there's still a lot of financial planners that require you to have a minimum net worth, and a lot of people don't meet that. So they feel like this is not for me. And honestly, I felt that for many years as well. I felt like I would hear about the stock market, but I never associated that that was something for me, even when I was working as an attorney. And I think a lot of people also make this mistake is like, I had a 401k, but it didn't connect in my mind that a 401k, this thing that my employer offers, is the stock market, right? So to this day, I still get questions where people are like, "Oh, you talk about investing. Does a 401k count?" And I'm like, "Yes, it absolutely counts. Like that's all the stock market, right?" So that connection is just not being made. And so people have felt left out, especially women, especially people of color. And bridging that gap is like what I'm trying to do here. And I tell people it's 80% vocabulary, it's like the rest is all psychology and very little of it is math. It's like a little sprinkle of math. You do not need to know math, which is like gave me so much peace because I went to law school to avoid math. So I'm like, I get it. Like nobody likes math. I get it. But I promise you, you do not need like, a complicated like spreadsheet or calculators and all the formulas in order to figure this stuff out. So I think once I explain it that way and I'm able to break it down in a way that's approachable, people are like, "Oh, okay. Wow. Why haven't I done this? Like, I should have been doing this all along." And so it's coming, meeting people where they are without being condescending and, reaching them with empathy. I think the second reason why people don't invest is probably because, to be very honest and blunt, there's no way around it. A lot of people don't have the money, right? A lot of
Yeah.
people don't have the money, even with knowing how important it is and knowing that they want to do it. People are struggling. Like the economy right now is really rough. Inflation is through the roof. People are struggling to pay their bills. They're living paycheck to paycheck. And, prioritizing something like the future is really hard when you're struggling to maintain your present. So I'm also very empathetic to that situation. And I tell people all the time, I'm like, investing is a privilege. It's something that is a privilege and yet so much a necessity because without it, you're going to have to work till the day you die and you cannot have a dignified retirement. So it's very tricky in America where we have no safety net. It is all on us. And so I'm like, yes, it's a privilege, but it's also like we need to find a way to make it happen for you because you so need this. I want you to have the peace of mind that this is being taken care of. So it's really hard to find that balance. And I try to be as empathetic as I can in the messaging that I put out there.
And I think you do that really well. Like you communicate both the importance of it, but also understanding that it is something that perhaps you have to work towards being able to do. Maybe it requires a really conscious effort to be able to have that money, and maybe that takes time for you to be able to do that, but to understand the importance. And this kind of touches on the other question for you, which is yes, some people can't afford to do it. It's
Hmm.
not possible right now. But other people, and I was definitely in this category for many years, we have different habits and mindsets and behaviors that stop us from really being able to put that
Hmm.
money into anything else. Can you talk a little bit about what some of those are? Maybe even ones that you've found in yourself that
Hmm.
you overcame or you found in clients? What are
Hmm.
we doing mentally and even just actions that are stopping us from making this happen even later down the road?
Yeah, I think I was reading, I don't know if it was like a study or something where it was saying that as we age, we have like a freeze frame in our mind of how we see ourselves and it's always younger. Right? We never see ourselves older. We always see ourselves younger. So that's why when you talk to somebody who's like 50, 60, they're like, I still feel like I'm 18 inside. They really see themselves that way. And so it's very rare to go to somebody and be like, oh, yeah, I see myself as 80. I see myself as 90. Nobody does that. Nobody goes to the future. And so we do not have like a realistic mind, frame for that older person that we are going to inevitably meet, hopefully, if we're lucky enough. And most of us are going to meet that person, right? I think to age is a blessing. And I think that people just have a hard time connecting with this older person and thinking of them in an empathetic way. Like, wow, I really want to make sure that that person is taken care of. And like, I want them, this beautiful life that I'm building today, I want to be able to continue to live it if I can't work or if I choose to stop working or if I want to spend more time with my family. I want that older version of me to be able to do that stress free. And so being able to do that, go through that exercise is something that we rarely do. And it's funny because like I don't live like that. I think again, I should keep track of more of where I read these things. But somebody said, start building your life from your, what is it? Your obituary, like what you would want it to read and what you want people to say, and like live your life backwards from that. And that's like kind of how I live my life. I'm like, what do I want to feel proud of at the end? What do I, if, when I go, what do I want people to be able to say? And so that's how I live my life, is like kind of going backwards. And I think like there's a lot of value of to doing that. And if more people did that, I think they would be able to, put more money towards the future, because they feel more connected to that future. And so, it's tricky because life is all about like being present, but we also have to plan. And I think that people really do struggle seeing the future, especially if you're feeling like very bleak about what's going on. I think, if you're reading a lot of news and you're paying attention to what's going on in politics, it can feel almost like an existential crisis to think about the future. So people are just like, I don't want to think about this. And investing is part of that future. And I don't want to deal with that. And so I understand. So I think that that's like probably what's causing a lot of people to just not deal with it. And also they think we mismanage, how do I say, we feel like 20, 30 years is so far away, but time actually goes by so much faster. Like 10 years just flies by. So we think we have more time than we do. And before you know it, you're 40 or 50 or 60, and you're like, oh my God, I never started doing the thing that I said I was going to start. So we tend to, miscalculate how fast time will go.
Yeah.
And I really try to reframe all of this in many different ways to kind of snap people into it, so that hopefully they can start taking action as soon as possible.
Yeah, this is the future. The disconnect from the future self is a huge one when you say it. And when you were communicating that, I was thinking that was exactly it. It's when I was in my 20s, I didn't even think about being in my 30s, let alone 50s, 60s, 70s.
Yes.
And it also, I wonder, because it's something you said which stuck, is that time goes so fast, but at the same time, it's almost as if you invest, I think a lot of people don't realize how much it compounds over that time frame
Mhm.
to make it worth it, where they think, "Oh, I don't have so much, so why should I start now?" And they don't realize that those 10 years, those 20 years could be
Mhm.
so beneficial to you. I don't
No,
know. What do you
absolutely.
think
Well,
about that?
investing, yeah, I think investing $100 a month in your 20s, it can make or break your entire retirement. It's crazy how much the money very early on, and it's when it's going to hurt the most, right? Because in your 20s, you're probably not making the most money, and you want to have fun, you want to go out with your friends, and that's like the toughest time in your life probably to save and be responsible with your money, but that's also when those dollars are going to count for so much more. So, it's hard to connect to make, those two connections like real for people, especially in their 20s. And I get it, because sometimes I've said this before, even if like Warren Buffett himself had appeared when I was 25 and told me all the secrets and for investing and everything, I would have been like, okay, guy, whatever. Like, I don't want to think about this right now. I've got so much more on my plate. I can't think about investing. So it really is hard sometimes, to get people focused when they're in that age range. But I found that Gen Z has really surprised me over and over again. And I'm like so hopeful for the future because of Gen Z. I'm so happy for them, because they are just picking up the slack like in so many ways. And I mean, I've learned so much from them. I think they're incredible. So I think that they're going to actually surprise a lot of us and do really well in the future. And I see a lot of them talking about personal finance and changing and breaking cycles of poverty and breaking cycles of shame in the workplace and advocating for themselves and negotiating.
But I think it's
Yes.
important too to spread a message, which you always do, is that it's never too late to
Yes.
start. It's never too late to overcome these different things, like whether your parents struggled or your grandparents or you have behaviors that you've learned, it's never too late for you to challenge that.
Absolutely. And I tell that to people all the time because, I didn't start investing until I was 28, which I still consider very young. And some people will come to me and be like, well, I'm 35, it's too late. And I'm like, no, that's like still very, very young. Like, honestly, I have students who are 50, 55 taking my program. And will they be able to retire or retire early? Who knows? Like, everybody's different. It's possible that they can't, but they're still going to have more money in their bank account than if they did nothing at all. So I'm like, you know what? Even if you can't retire, of course you should invest. You absolutely should, because who knows, maybe you can go part-time. I tell people, it's not all or nothing. Maybe instead of working 40 hours a week, you only have to work 20 hours a week. Isn't that worth it? Like, wouldn't that be worth doing this? And people are like, oh, yeah, I never thought about it that way. Or, there's just so much that can come up. I mean, there's so many gaps in, unfortunately, our system, with healthcare. There's so many things that are going to come up that are unknown. Knowing that you have a little bit extra in your nest egg for things like that is going to give you so much peace of mind. So I say, yeah, invest whatever you can for as long as you can, even if you can't reach traditional retirement, even if you can't retire early, whatever it is, like, yes, invest because it's always good to have more money than less.
So true. Can I feel like that's a message that I just wanted to make sure we said because I know the listeners are a huge range of ages,
Yeah.
and I see you posting about this. I know that you don't exclude any group, that you're very inclusive about it, which kinda touches on something as well is how do you feel like your work has evolved as a money coach since you started to now? Do you see I know you talked a little bit about Gen Z maybe bringing up more of these issues, but do you see
hmm
other ways that things are transforming, especially for women since it's 90% of your clients? How are things changing? How are things stuck?
Yeah, I think, in the beginning, and this is I think what happens with most coaches or teachers or anybody who's, teaching in some way on the internet. You start with like the very basics of it, right? And I was very focused on like the how to of investing. Oh, this is how you open a Roth IRA and this is how you do this and this is what an index fund is and just explaining all of that, which I'm glad I went through that process and there's a lot of information that I put out, but that is not where the mindset shift is going to happen for people. Like, I do not think that most people are not investing because they don't know what a Roth IRA is. I don't think that that's what's going on. I think it's, just like anything else, it's behavioral, it's psychological. There's a lot of myths and blockages, around money. There's a lot of anxiety around money, shame, and like not addressing those things is missing out on a huge part of this area. Like personal finance, like I said, it's mostly psychological, like it's vocab and psychology. And if you're not talking about psychology, you're not addressing like the core issue that comes from personal finance. So I think just focusing on how to content is a mistake if you do it forever. And so I've really shifted a lot of my content to talking about money trauma, healing, like generational trauma, things that you have learned from your parents, like breaking those stories, like where does that come from? Talking about the struggles of women and people of color in particular in a system that has often ignored us, right? Like a lot of stuff in the personal finance space is geared towards men or, people who are not minorities and they're not addressing those specific struggles. So I try to make space for those stories. I try to feature voices. Whenever I do post other people's content on my page, I would say 99% of the stuff I post is from other creators of color. That's what I'm trying to, create is like that safe space. And recently I've just been talking a lot more about the relationship between men and women and the power struggles of patriarchy and how money and patriarchy interact with each other. That even as women overcome things like the gender wage gap and they do negotiate and they do overcome all the obstacles. I'll tell people, I'm like, if you don't want to talk about politics, then you don't come to my page, because like if you were just expecting to learn what a 401k is, this is not the page for you because I'm going to talk about politics because money is political. So this is just stuff that I've been really leaning into, especially after I quit my 9 to 5 and I wasn't in corporate America anymore and I could really be free and express myself without worry.
Yeah, and you can see if you scroll through your posts, you can actually see that evolution of touching more on the psychology, more on the money
hmm
trauma, more on specific struggles that people of color face and bringing that in. And it's so interesting because when you say it, it's so obvious. Of course, you need to know the psychology, but then traditionally that hasn't been talked about because, too, a lot of the people who were investing or in this world they didn't necessarily have to struggle with that, right? Like, they came
hmm
from money or they weren't facing some of the institutional biases that we are now,
hmm
and I just find it fascinating that that's an aspect that isn't talked about, that is completely left to the side as if you could just memorize the vocabulary and be okay.
Exactly. I think it's such a missed opportunity. And I think the personal finance space, especially, the traditional financial institutions are starting to see that if they want to have customers that are from Main Street who, are just everyday working people, they're going to have to talk about these things. They're going to have to address it. And that just catering to like high earning individuals who are not struggling with these things is leaving out a lot of people out of the conversation. So I am seeing a lot of traditional financial institutions working with people like me in the space to bring this message to the masses. But that's definitely like a very recent development. And I really do think that influencers are responsible for that. Like, I don't think that these massive banks and corporations would be doing this kind of work if we hadn't like breached the subject online first. So it's good to see, but it's still very intimidating for most people. So I think social media is still going to be like that first touch point where people hear about these subjects, and the dealing with the financial institution will be second.
Yeah, but this is an interesting point actually, is that if people listening, for example, they work for big businesses or companies,
Mhm.
if you can somehow solicit or petition to have people like you come in and be paid to speak on this, because it's knowledge that is so important and will actually benefit the well-being of the employees anyway. You
Mhm.
know, it's good that they don't have to worry about financial struggles every day and be focused on that, and they can actually focus on their work. So it's interesting development for that to happen and going in that direction.
I've done a few of those workshops where I've gone into like law firms and different employment. Like I've done one for Google, I've done one for Geico, I've done like a lot of different workshops for different companies where they're like, yeah, just please come in and talk to our employees about, their 401k plans. And they have people from those institutions that obviously service those plans, but they know that like there's a language gap here. There is a connection missing. And so that's why they're recruiting people from outside of the traditional finance space to do these things. So again, I don't think like we're in competition with each other. Sometimes people think that I'm like anti financial planners or financial advisors or that, and I'm like, that's not it. I think that there's a place for everyone. And like I serve a purpose and they serve a purpose. And like I'm bridging a gap that they've ignored for a really long time? So like
Yeah.
my goal is to get somebody to a point where they can hire a financial planner someday if they want to, where that's not an intimidating thing for them, where they understand what their financial planner is saying to them. Because a lot of these financial planners will not sit down and explain these things to you. They don't have the time, they don't have the patience, they're overwhelmed. And so I'm like, I'm like at the beginning, I'm meeting people where they are at a different stage than where the financial industry is. So I don't think we need to compete with each other. I think we need to work together.
You're making it more accessible and relatable and also possible for them one day to work with a financial planner,
Yeah.
because many people are not in that position. They have to overcome the psychology that you talked about, the habits. They have
Yeah.
to be saving to be able to do this investment. Do you have, I know that in your Slay the Market course, you probably already talk about this a little bit, but do you have a general number that you say to people, have this much in savings before you start investing? Or is it on more on a case by case basis that they decide?
So, industry standard has always been 3 to 6 months of living expenses. And I do strongly stick to that as a minimum, 3 to 6 months, because I think it's so important to have that safety net. And I tell people, do not invest a single dollar until you have that safety net set up, because that is the priority at the end of the day. I don't want you investing money and then your car breaks down or you lose your job or something happens and then you're having to drain that entire account and then start again from zero. Also, like, you might be hurting yourself because if the market's down for some reason, right? And you're in the negative, like, oh, I haven't had enough time for this to grow and compound. Now you're down from the original amount that you had in the first place. And the whole point of investing to make money in investing, I tell people all the time, 10-year minimum, 10-year minimum. If you're not leaving that money in for at least 10 years, you're already shooting yourself in the foot. I'm like, don't even bother because that's how long it takes for money to compound in a significant way. So if you're thinking, oh, I might need this money in the next 6 months, a year, 5 years, I'm like, absolutely not. Like that money should not be invested. So people will ask me, oh, I'm saving for a down payment on this. And well, when are you planning to buy? Oh, in the next 3 to 5 years. That money should not be in the stock market. That should be in a savings account somewhere, a high yield savings account earning interest. So I'm very, very clear with people about that. And obviously, people are free to do whatever they want, but that is the advice I give. And I think having that emergency fund is like the first step to giving yourself financial security and peace of mind. Investing can come after that. And if you're going to be an investor for 10, 15, 20 years, putting some time aside to build an emergency fund is nothing. It's a drop in the bucket of time. So take the time to do that, give yourself that peace of mind and be patient because you're going to be an investor for decades. So there's no reason to rush into it thinking that like, oh, I don't want to miss out. Like she told me to start as soon as possible and I don't want to miss out. And I'm like, no, no, no. Let's get something straight. Like you putting 6 to 8 months aside to save an emergency fund is not going to derail your financial plan. Even a year. Like if you don't need to put a year aside to focus on saving money and paying off some debt and do that. But the emergency fund is like the minimum. The next step would be like, oh, people are like, oh, well, I have debt. Should I invest? Yes. I always say invest while you're paying off debt, especially things like student loans that are going to be for many, many years. Because again, you do have time, but you don't want to like, it usually takes people like 10 to 20 years to pay off a student loan. Can you imagine being like, yeah, don't invest until you're completely debt free and you're losing out on 10 to 20 years of compounding interest? That's crazy. So absolutely invest while you're paying off debt. But I think like the only time to pause is when you're saving that emergency fund.
Yeah. This is so important to hear because I think this is messaging that we've kind of heard, but not in such relatable terms to understand it. And that reframe of, yes, you want to get started, and yes, it's exciting, but it is almost a lifelong thing to do is investing.
Mm-hmm.
So if you need to spend a year or even 2 years to get your safety fund there, and we've
Mm-hmm.
all needed that fund and not had it. So it's like
Exactly.
you need to focus on it. What about I wanna make sure I ask you this question as well. I know you talk about having a wealth map. If you can just discuss a little bit about why that's so important when you're trying to get to this stage of freedom and financial empowerment.
So the point of the wealth map is to see like how your money flows. Like, so usually the traditional way is like, here's my paycheck, and like, where does it flow into your like money, the ecological system that is like your money. So where is it going? Usually people will have like one checking account, maybe they'll have a savings account, and then they'll just like pay off a bunch of bills and that's it, right? And so building a wealth map is like being more intentional about how your money is flowing to certain places, but also automating a lot of this because at the end of the day, we are all like being pulled in a million directions, right? And let's face it. So once you have your wealth map set up and you're like, okay, these are my goals. This is where money should be flowing first. This is where money should be flowing second. Automating all that and then just being able to like go back to living your life. This is the key to achieving like your goals in personal finance that people seem to overlook. They think it's something else. I don't know. They think it's some kind of secret strategy. You always see those videos where they're like, here's a secret the millionaires don't want you to know. I'm like,
Yes.
stop. Let me tell you something. There is no secret that a millionaire doesn't want you to know. Like nobody's thinking about you like that. Okay. It's not like that. It's the secret to building wealth is really boring and not sexy at all. It's about just having a goal and then like automating your way to that goal so that it's just like brushing your teeth in the morning. And hopefully y'all are brushing your teeth. So just it should feel like brushing your teeth. It should feel very mundane, but it's necessary because you're a grown up and you want to have teeth when you're like 60, right? You don't want to be wearing denture. Cool. This is how this should be. It should be like brushing your teeth. Your money should be flowing to different places and you should not have to think about it. So the wealth map gives you like that big picture at first, and then you set up your transfers, and then that's it. And then you get to go live your life. So it's something that doesn't take very long, but has such a massive impact when you actually do it. So I really do try to encourage people to do it as much as possible, which is why like I have it in like my free guide because I'm like at a minimum this is what everybody should be doing. So I have it there so everybody can do it and hopefully they're taking advantage of it.
Yeah, this is it because it's kind of if you don't sit down and look at it even just for a little bit and understand this, you can't really progress to the next step. And the automation thing is key too because that takes the onus off of the person to consciously have to go in and send the money to for their investment every month or to do
Yes.
other things. I know you talk about too, and I know there's not tons of time to talk about this, but I at least want to broach the subject where you mentioned using ChatGPT to help in
Mhm.
automation, to take some of the work
Yeah.
off.
Yeah, I like using ChatGPT to do things like, any kind of planning because we're always, whether it's oh, what am I going to eat this week, and I only have this much money to spend on groceries. So I have all these little prompts where you can literally put in and but ChatGPT create a 7-day meal plan for me with breakfast, lunch, and dinner that, if you're allergic to something, you can literally put that in, like, hey, with no lactose or no this or gluten free, whatever it is. And then you put in the amount and it will literally build like that whole grocery list, meal plan for you according to your budget. You'll have a ton of ideas. Boom. That takes so much stress off of your mind for the week, right? The other thing that I love using it for is for travel. If you're taking a trip anywhere, whether it's domestic or international, and you're like, hey, I'm going to New York for 3 days, please. I always say please to ChatGPT because, when these robots take over, I want them to remember that I
You want
was
them to remember you
nice.
were kind.
I'm like, I was very polite and I said, please and thank you. So I say, please create a 3-day itinerary for this place. This is my budget. Find hotels nearby and activities that are free, best activities that are free in the area. Boom. It's like a whole itinerary there for you, which I think is fascinating and it's so, so super helpful. So I think there's a lot of ways for it to grow and for it to help. And I also have some prompts for investing and ways to make money and things like that. But we're not at the place yet where ChatGPT is going to replace, like I had a couple of people try to teach yourself how to invest using ChatGPT, and they actually struggled with it because, again, if you don't know the language of investing, you actually don't even know the questions to ask and the follow ups that you need for ChatGPT to give you.
And this kind of highlights too, because you're talking about some of the areas that tangentially relate or directly relate to investing, which is saving, budgeting.
Yeah.
All of these things are we don't really think about, but the idea of using ChatGPT is brilliant, and it highlights this idea of how when you're doing the money coaching, it's so many things that maybe people don't necessarily pinpoint or consider, and gives them that base to be able to explore deeper. Because, yeah, even if you go on Google or YouTube and you have no idea the terms, if it sends you to a page about investing, it's not going to mean anything to you to just go and do that. So it's important to have that
Yeah.
guide. I love that. As a final question for you, before we get everyone to connect with you, what are some of the resources or places you think that people should start if they're ready to invest or they're ready to kind of get that savings fund and then start? I'm referencing anything you have as well. I know you mentioned a guide that can help too.
hmm Yeah, I have my free Slay Your Money guide, which is like 30 pages of resources. Everything's in there from like journal prompts, the wealth map that I talked about. There's like an easy 5-minute budget. There's a investment account cheat sheet, lots of stuff in there. And also my favorite podcast books, all that stuff is in there. I also had a podcast with CNN where the episodes are still available. It's called Diversifying. Tons of information about investing there. I teach a free class once a month that's also available. Obviously, all the videos that I post, I have so much information. But yeah, there's no lack of information today where people can go and start learning about investing. I think it's about finding somebody that you connect with, somebody who's consistent in their messaging. And also, I always say don't just follow one person. Like you want to follow several people, you want to reference a few different places so that you can start to see patterns, right? Because if you just pick one person, like that person could have an agenda for whatever reason. There's something going on that you don't know about. They could be sponsored or paid for by a certain entity. So you really want to reference different things. And then you start to see the patterns and you're like, okay, I'm now seeing that this is like, industry standard and this is like what I should be doing. And then you can go and execute a plan. So obviously I recommend anything that I've posted. I think things like Investopedia, Nerd Wallet, there's all these websites have so much great information, so lots of information there, and you can go, you know, back it up with listening to a podcast or reading a personal finance book. There's so many women and women of color that are entering the space now. So if you're looking for something that isn't completely tone deaf, those people are coming into the space. There's so much out there. So highly recommend you reach out beyond what like has been traditionally marketed to people because there's so many new voices in the space.
This is a huge, beautiful list. I'll make sure that we have it in the show notes because I don't want anyone to miss those resources. I think that it's fabulous. Thank you for not gatekeeping, really doing the opposite of that and sharing so much of your wisdom with just so openly like this. It really is inspiring to see, and it makes me feel a lot more positive about where things are going financial in the financial world. And I want to thank you for coming on the show, really, truly, and sharing this. Thank you.